to welcome you officially on behalf of our Mayor, Muriel Bowser, also our Commissioner, Karima M. Woods, and also on behalf of our partners at the Student Borrower Protection Center and the DC Office of the Attorney General. In fact, at this time, I would like to turn over our greetings to Lindsay Marks to make remarks on behalf of the DC OAG and Carl Racine, our Attorney General. Lindsay.
Thank you, Ricardo. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining. And thank you to Ricardo and Winston for helping organize and put together this really helpful information session. My name is Lindsay Marks. I'm a trial attorney with the Office of Consumer Protection for the DC Office of the Attorney General. And the Office of Consumer Protection works to investigate and address widespread issues relating to student loans. And we also work with Ricardo and DISB to educate borrowers on their rights. So I hope you all find this presentation helpful, and I'll turn it back to Ricardo.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. And again, we here at the Department of Insurance, Securities, and Banking are here to support you as district residents and district employees address issues related to your student loan debt and obtaining alternative sources to fund your education, or perhaps the post-secondary education of your children. Without further ado, because we have a lot to get into today, I want to introduce Winston Berkman-Breen, who is the Deputy Director of Advocacy and Policy Counsel at the Student Borrower Protection Center. He's going to speak to you about the temporary public service loan forgiveness waiver program and some other things that are up and coming with the Department of Education. At the end of our presentation, we will jump right into a rigorous question and answer period. I want to encourage you to hold your questions and comments until that time. You can put them in the chat. A great number of your questions will be answered during the course of the conversation that we will have today. I also want to let you know that this presentation is being recorded and will be made available for review on our website, disb.dc.gov. I will also let you know that there are past webinars on this topic that are available today as well. So without further ado, Winston, it's all yours. Take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Ricardo and DISB and OAG. And really everyone in DC for making time to do this. So again, my name is Winston Berkman-Breen. I'm with the Student Borrower Protection Center. We're a national policy nonprofit organization focused on ending the student debt crisis. What we're going to talk about today is the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program and some short-term changes to that program that make it easier to access that are ending later this month. My goal today is to help you, if you have never heard of this program and you want to know if it applies to you, is to explain it to you, explain the short-term changes and how they might apply to you, and then to give you concrete steps that you can take leaving this program in order to access it by the upcoming deadline, right? So there's going to be some intentional repetition here. And for folks who are just joining, we haven't gotten to the substance. We're about to jump in. There's some intentional repetition here because we want to make sure you understand the full contours of the program, the changes, and then exactly what you have to do and by what deadline. All of this is being recorded. All prior webinars have been recorded already and are available on DISB's website. You can also go to a website that our organization maintains called forgivemystudentdebt.org. That's forgivemystudentdebt.org. It'll be on a slide later on, and you can see the same content broken out into small little video chunks for each step of the way, as well as written instructions. So again, the goal is to have you leave this webinar knowing what you have to do to make sure you can benefit from public service loan forgiveness and the special changes that are short-term changes, but then also make sure you have the resources to follow up if you have more questions. All right, so we are going to get started. I'm going to share my presentation. Great. And although I said this is a public service loan forgiveness presentation, and it will be, that's the vast majority of what we're going to cover, I am going to start with cancellation, the president's recent announcement about student debt cancellation for borrowers. And this is important for two reasons. One, you may have heard about cancellation. You may have heard about PSLF. You might not understand the differences between them. The student loan world, I want to acknowledge upfront, is extremely confusing. If you are coming into this webinar confused, that is you and everyone else, right? It's very confusing. So our goal is to demystify that for you. And so I'm going to cover cancellation in just a single slide. both so that you understand how it's different from public service loan forgiveness, but also later on in the presentation, there are some ways in which they could potentially interact, and I want to make sure you understand that. So again, just this one slide on cancellation, because we're going to talk about public service loan forgiveness for the rest of the time together. So about 6 weeks ago, President Biden announced that about 40 million borrowers in the country are going to receive some level of debt cancellation on their federal student loan debts. For about 20 million borrowers, that's going to mean their accounts are completely wiped out. Their debts will be canceled. So folks are going to be eligible if they meet the income cutoffs for up to $10,000 in cancellation on their student loan debts, and an additional $10,000 for a total of 20 if they were a Pell Grant recipient. A Pell Grant is a non-loan. It's a grant that folks can get to support their higher education if they come from a low-income household. This is not for everyone. It's only for people whose individual incomes were $125,000 or whose household or married incomes were $250,000 for either year, 2020, 2021 tax year, right? So if their taxable income in either of those years were to 125 for an individual or 250, then they're eligible for the $10,000 and the additional 10 if they also receive the Pell Grant. This runs through the individual, not the household. So multiple people in a household could get this benefit if the household income is under 250, right? This is not going to be automatic. So folks are going to have to apply. The government just this week previewed what the application looks like. It's a simple online form, no uploads, no login. You're just going to have to put in your name, your birthday, your social security information, your social security number, and then do a simple, what's called an attestation about your income. Just basically say or click a box that says my income is below these cutoffs, right? Some people might qualify for automatic cancellation if they've recently given their income information to the Department of Education. Although, we might think, oh, well, the IRS has my income information. That's not how the federal government works. So the Department of Education has to have it. Even for these people, they're going to get an opt-out opportunity. So it'll be automatic, but they're still going to get a notice about it and have the opportunity to say, you know what, I don't want this for whatever reason. I'm going to opt out. We expect that application to come out in the next week or two. It'll come out in October. And if folks take advantage of it by mid-November, then their loans should get the cancellation before January when payments resume on federal student loans. So for some people, that means they can get their loans completely wiped out before payments resume in January. But the application will be open all of the next year, all of 2023. So honestly, that is sort of the end of what I'm going to say about cancellation. If there are some questions, we can address it in the Q&A, but we're really going to focus on public service loan forgiveness. The reason we're starting here is because this is not a substitute for public service loan forgiveness. This is $10,000 or $20,000 for some people who qualify based on their income. As we will learn, public service loan forgiveness can wipe out your entire debt balance and has no income cutoff. It just depends on what kind of job you do, which we're going to explain, which means if you have more than $10,000 or $20,000 in student loan debt, you're going to want to make sure you pursue public service loan forgiveness and really focus on what we're going to talk about. And then, as always, look out for scams. Right now, there is this great news out there about cancellation. That means that scammers are going to come out. You shouldn't be paying anyone money for help with cancellation or help with public service loan forgiveness. There's no need to do that. All right. That was our public service announcement about cancellation. Now we're going to move into PSLF. So again, I don't want to presume any background, so we're going to really start from the beginning, talk about PSLF as a program, talk about the short-term changes to PSLF, and then talk about what you need to do to figure out how you benefit and steps you have to take to make sure you benefit on time. So public service loan forgiveness was created by Congress in 2007 to help public service workers who were struggling with student loan debt and to make sure that future students and graduates wouldn't be deterred from entering public service because of their student loan debt balance. So put quite simply, if you're not familiar with it, PSLF, or public service loan forgiveness, is the promise that if a borrower works in public service and makes payments for 10 years, the remainder of their debt will be forgiven after that time. So it's a little bit more complicated than that, but we're going to walk through it. So how does it actually work? There's actually 4 specific criteria. I'm going to list them and then go into each of them, right, with more detail. So first, you need to have what's called a direct loan. That's one type of several types of federal student loan. Second, you need to be in the correct repayment plan. There are several repayment plans. You need to be in the correct type or set of payment plans, for which for most people is going to be the income-driven repayment plan. Third, you need to work in public service. And finally, you need to make 120 payments or 10 years worth of payments while you have the right loan on the right plan with the right job. All right, so now I'm going to drill down into each of these. Okay, so the first criteria, only direct loans qualify for public service loan forgiveness. Direct loans have been the main type of federal student loan since 2010. So if you've taken out a loan since then, it is likely already the right type. If you have another type of federal student loan, such as a federal family education loan, which you sometimes see as an FFEL or FEL loan, sometimes there's a P on the end for the word program, an FFEL P loan, or a Perkins loan, those do not qualify initially. But what you can do is you can convert those loans into a direct loan through a process called consolidation. Consolidation is basically like refinancing your loan with the government. You're taking out a new federal student loan that is a direct loan type to pay off your old federal student loan that is not a direct loan type. So under the normal PSLF program rules, when you do that process, that conversion, that consolidation, you lose any past time or credit on your old loans. You're taking out a new loan. So to get PSLF for that new loan, you have to do 10 years worth. That makes consolidation really frustrating for a lot of people who didn't know initially that they had the wrong loan type and so have to make this change. As we'll discuss in a moment, these special new rules that are short term and in effect right now with this waiver period that we're going to talk about changes that. And that's really powerful and really important. But I'm making the point here that in general, when you consolidate your loan, you're restarting your clock on PSLF, but some people need to consolidate in order to get that direct loan type that's necessary. Okay, the second criteria, your direct loan needs to be in the right repayment plan. Again, for most people, that's going to be an income-driven repayment plan or an IDR plan. It doesn't matter how much you pay on these plans, just that you're in the correct plan or one of the correct plans. So there are a couple of different IDR payment plans. It's a broader umbrella term. And those plans are income-based repayment or IBR, income contingent repayment, ICR, pay as you earn, PAYE, or repay, REPAYE. So some other plans can qualify in certain instances, but in terms of giving general advice, the IDR plans are generally the best fit for folks. So these plans have slight variations between each other, but essentially all have some common characteristics, which is that normally your monthly payment for your federal student loan is calculated by saying, how much do you owe, how long is your repayment period, and how much do you have to pay each month to pay off the total balance over that period, right? You're sort of just dividing the total by the number of months in repayment. The way that income-based repayments work is they say, okay, we're going to make the payments based on how much you earn. So what they do is they calculate what they consider to be your discretionary income, which is not your whole income. It's not your gross taxable income. It's actually less than that because they take out the equivalent of the federal poverty line. So they're only looking at income you make above the federal poverty, above a certain percentage of the federal poverty line. And then they're going to take 10 or 15% of that. This is meant to be the affordable payment plan, right? Because it is a percentage of a portion of your income rather than just your regular monthly payment. So I want to acknowledge though that it's not always affordable for people. It's considered the affordable plan and it's a qualifying plan for PSLF, but for many people, it's either unaffordable or it creates this situation where they're not paying down their loan month after month. So basically, if your payment under IDR is low, and if you're low income or no income, your payment can be as low as $0. It's a $0 payment. In instances like that, your monthly payment might not be enough to cover the monthly interest that is accruing on your loan. So the interest just stacks up month after month after month. And sometimes that interest can get folded into the principal, and now you're doing interest on interest, right? This is what happens when you hear people and you hear stories about people who suddenly owe more than they borrowed, right? Or they've been in repayment for 10 years and haven't gotten below the principal borrowing amount. And it's very frustrating. It's a process called negative amortization. So I want to acknowledge that, that is that can happen with these plans, and it is very alarming to see your account grow. Because of that, these plans offer their own type of cancellation after 20 or 25 years. That's still a long time, but the idea is they didn't want to keep you in a permanent debt trap. If you're making these affordable payments each year and you have to recertify your income each year to calculate your payment, after 20 or 25 years, your loan will be forgiven. Now, for you all, for public service loan forgiveness, that's cancellation after 10 years. So that 2025 doesn't really matter. And 10 years is still a little while. But I just want to make that point because you might have been on IDR, you might have friends or family who are on IDR, you might have had bad experiences with IDR. For some of you, IDR is totally fine. But for others, I want to make this point that it's not a perfect system, but it is the payment plan that most people will want to be on for public service loan forgiveness purposes. Okay, so that's the second criteria, payment plan. The third is you need to work in public service, right? So critically, the focus here is on your employer, not on your role. It doesn't matter what you do, it matters who you work for. So you have to work for a qualifying public service employer. So that is any government, city, state, county, federal, tribal, public school district, any 501c3 nonprofit, any nonprofit that has that specific 501c3 designation, and certain other nonprofits that are not 501c3, but offer public services like public safety or public education or elder care or things like that. Most people are going to fall into the government and the 501c3 buckets, which are just categorical. It doesn't matter what kind of government, what kind of 501c3. If you're one of those two types, your employer qualifies, and if you work for them, you can qualify. But you do have to work full time. So full time is generally defined as the greater of 30 hours a week, or whatever your employer says is full time. So if your employer says 35 hours a week is full time for them, then you have to work 35 hours a week to get qualified. Now, I will say here that the Department of Education is changing this, and they have said that they are going to accept 30 hours regardless of what your employer says. They have not put that into print and put it on their website. So I'm making that note for you. You work the hours that you work. So everyone should plan to just, as we'll talk about later, certify the hours that you work. But I do want to flag that they're in the process of shifting to a categorical 30 hours for everyone, so that you don't have people who have the same jobs for different employers, but one of them has a higher eligibility. So I think you can think of it as 30 hours a week, although they have not officially said to everyone that that's in effect yet. The final thing is you don't have to work for a single employer. If you have two part-time employers, each of whom qualifies public service workers at the same public service employers at the same time, if you combine their hours and they're at least 30 hours, you can still qualify. Okay, that's the third criteria. And finally, you need to make 120 of these qualifying payments on the right loan, on the right repayment plan, while you have that full-time qualifying job. If any of those things change, if you stop making payments, or if you experience unemployment or retire or go into the for-profit sector, those months won't count towards public service loan forgiveness, towards the 120. You have to have all three of those aligned, and you have to have 120 of them. They don't need to be consecutive, and they don't need to be with the same employer. You can leave the workforce, come back to the workforce, change jobs. You can do all those things, and you'll pick right back up where you left off in terms of your public service loan forgiveness credit. Okay, so there have been some slight changes under COVID because of this, which is mostly just that the payment pause that's been in effect for most public service workers, for most federal student loan borrowers since March of 2020. Each of those paused months, which will be about almost 3 years when it's all said and done, each of those months will count as a qualifying payment. You still have to have the right job, you still have to have the right loan type, but it'll count as the payment plan that you needed, even though you're not actually making a payment, right? So that is almost 3 years of qualifying payments for anyone who has the right job and the right loan type. Okay, so that's the regular public service loan forgiveness program. Now, we spent time doing that because although there are short-term changes that make it easier to apply, and we're about to talk about that, those are going to go away at some point, and these regular rules are going to come back. So it's really important that you understand how the program works in general, because soon those are going to be in effect again. So maybe you think this sounds great, maybe you think this sounds hard, or you know it's hard. The bottom line is this program really wasn't working very well. So it started in 2007. Takes 10 years. The first class of people who were eligible for cancellation was in 2017. There was a literal 99% rejection rate when people started to apply. People didn't, they were never told they have to have a certain loan type. They were never told they have to be in a certain repayment plan, or even worse, their servicer, the company that they interact with their student loans, affirmatively told them that they were good. They were good to go. Everything was good. And then after 10 years, it turns out one of those things wasn't right, and they've lost all this time. And as I mentioned earlier, if you were in the wrong loan plan and you have to consolidate to convert it, you're starting over from scratch. So for people in this situation, it was really devastating and a problem, and just a totally broken promise. People really relied on this opportunity when they went to school and took out debt, or when they took a job that maybe didn't pay as much. So that was in 2017, and sort of remained a problem in terms of how this program has been communicated. Flash forward to last summer, the Biden administration and the Department of Education, for the first time ever, put out something called a request for information. They wanted to hear from borrowers, how is public service loan forgiveness working for you? What are the problems we need to address? They got an overwhelming response, 50,000 comments, over 50,000 comments, which was just amazing. And from all sorts of public service workers that you see here listed on the screen. And they were all describing very similar problems. I didn't have the right loan type and no one told me, or I was in repayment, but the wrong repayment plan, or the payment plan is not affordable, whatever it might be, really made the problems crystal clear. So that brings us to what we're here to talk about today. A time-limited waiver of some of the public service loan forgiveness requirements. So within weeks of that request for information period ending, the federal government announced a special waiver that would address many of the issues that were flagged. So for a limited period of time, and here's where I'm going to start to get repetitive because I want to make sure you really understand what's happening here. For a limited period of time, the Department of Education will retroactively grant credit towards public service loan forgiveness cancellation to borrowers for months that previously didn't count because they had the wrong loan type or in the wrong payment plan. So those two things specifically, we're going to walk through this. And you see those two parts boxed off here on the screen. So essentially what it does is it gives a public service worker credit towards loan forgiveness, regardless of their loan type, for any period of time since October 2007, when Pslf began, as long as they were in a qualifying public service employment job, and as long as their loans were not in default, deferment, or forbearance. So default and deferment and forbearance are all periods where you don't have to make a payment. What they've done and said is that as long as you were in a repayment status, whatever plan you were in will give you credit. Even for months in which you didn't actually make a payment or you made a late payment, we'll give you credit for that month as long as you were in a repayment status again. So not in default, deferment, or forbearance. The credits will be retroactive, so you can receive credits for past months that didn't count, even if you were explicitly told, like you applied and rejected and said that didn't count. Those will be added to your account. So again, I'm going to repeat it one more time because this is the point of why we're all here. For any month since October 2007 that a borrower had any type of federal student loan and worked for a qualifying public service employer and was not in default, deferment, or forbearance, that borrower can receive credit towards 120 months needed for forgiveness or cancellation under Pslf. So one big note here, and we'll talk about this more in the Q&A maybe, is that parent plus borrowers, which is a type of federal student loan where you're the borrower, but you're not the student. You're the borrower for your child, your dependent child or grandchild. They are not eligible for this waiver unless they consolidate their loan and mix it up with another type of federal student loan where you're the borrower and the student. So just to note that parent plus loans, if you only have parent plus loans, this waiver does not apply to you. But we can talk more about that in the Q&A. Okay. So the waiver is not automatic. So normally, again, Pslf requires a direct loan. Although the waiver will give you credit for time when you didn't have a direct loan, those who don't have a direct loan have to convert it, take that step through consolidation into a direct loan by the end of this waiver process. And again, normally you lose credit when you do that. That's why I made this point earlier. When you consolidate, you lose past time. That's not true during the waiver. So they're saying you don't have a direct loan, you have to have one by the end of this waiver process, but we're not going to penalize you for it. Also, and that's only if you don't have a direct loan, right? But also all borrowers have to make sure that their past employment is certified with the federal government. The Department of Education doesn't know where you work until you tell them, and they can't give you credit for your public service work until you tell them. So anyone who's worked, who wants public service loan forgiveness credit has to certify their employment since October 2007 for any job that they want credit for, right? Otherwise, the government can't do it. And the deadline is fast approaching, right? You have to do these two steps. Change your loan type if you have to, certify your employment if you have to before Halloween. That's in roughly 2 weeks. This doesn't mean that the whole process has to be done. You have to just apply to change your loan type. You don't have to have them process it and give you your new loan. You have to submit your employment certification to the Department of Education. You don't have to have them come back and say, yes, this is good. You have to just put in your papers by this deadline. And then it'll take a couple of months, honestly, for the government to process everything, but you'll still be considered on time. Also, this doesn't only apply to people who already have the 10 years under their belt. A lot of people will have the 10 years under their belt and get their loans canceled through this basically overnight, which is fantastic. But if you've been working for only a couple of years, a couple of months, it's still worth doing this to make sure you get all the credits you're eligible for. And then all those credits will stay on your account after the waiver, and you can continue to accrue more credit going forward after October under the regular program rules until you hit 120. That's why we started with the regular program rules, so that you know that by the end of the waiver, you have to have a direct loan, you have to be in a certain repayment plan so that you can continue to accrue credits. Okay, so What do you need to know, right? So we talked about the regular program rules. We've talked about the changes to them. Now we're going to talk about what you actually have to do to make sure you benefit from this. I'm going to lay out the concrete steps. And then again, repetition is our friend. I'm going to walk you through with screenshots how to take each of those steps. My goal is to have you feel informed and empowered at the end of this webinar to take these steps. And again, these resources are available online also. So you can revisit them, either the videos or written instructions for how to do each of this. Okay, so to figure out if this waiver applies to you and what steps you have to take, here are the 3 things you should do. So confirm that your past or present employers are public service employers. We're going to talk about each of these in more detail, but again, if they're not the right employer type, this whole thing isn't worth it for you. Figure out what kind of loans you have and whether you have to convert the loan type, and then certify your employment with the federal government. Okay, so first, do you have a qualifying employer? So nothing about qualifying employment has changed for PSLF at all, ever, right? You always have to have the right kind of job. You still need to work for government, 501c3, or certain other nonprofits. However, one thing about the waiver actually has changed, which is that normally for public service loan forgiveness, you have to still have that employment when you apply for and receive cancellation. So it doesn't matter if you have 10 years under your belt. If you retire or change jobs or are unemployed, if you apply, you'll be rejected. If you apply and then retire, change jobs, or unemployed, you'll be rejected. That has been, and that's just in the law. Congress just for some reason did that. That's been waived during this program. So if you are no longer in public service work, you can now get credit for your past time and get cancellation. You can always apply to get the credit for your past time, regardless of your job. You just won't get the cancellation unless you're in a current public service employment job normally. That part has been waived. So if you've moved on, gone to the private sector, retired, been laid off, you can still now apply, get your credit, and also get cancellation if you're eligible for it. So again, qualifying employers, federal, state, local governments, all 501c3 tax exempt, certain other nonprofits that are not 501c3, such as public safety or public education organizations. So if you aren't sure whether your employer qualifies, the government does maintain a website, a tool called the Pslf Help tool that you can search, look up your employer using their tax EIN number, employer identification number. They have an employer search tool too that you don't even have to log in. You can just plug in your employer's information. Now, importantly, this is not an exhaustive universe, this database they have. It's only a database of employers whose employees have already applied, right? So it's a cumulative. They keep adding employers as new employees apply. So if your employer doesn't get pulled up in the search results, or the search result seems wrong, that's not a determination on your status. This is just a helpful way to just confirm as a rough touch, like an estimate, do I qualify, do I not? But really the backbone of it is do I work for a government employer, 501c3 employer? We've got slight gray area of other nonprofits. Now, critically here, it's to your actual employers, who's cutting your check, who is a W-2 employer for you. So if you're a contractor and you're doing government work, you're not a government employee for this program. You're an employee of your contractor. So is your contractor a 501c3 or are they a for-profit? For-profit employers are not eligible for this, unfortunately. Even if you're a for-profit healthcare provider, I think on this webinar can appreciate that that's public service work, but that's not the way the program is structured currently. And we're focused right now, not on the policy conversation, but on what you need to do to benefit. So currently it is the case that for-profit employment does not qualify no matter what you're doing. So again, think about whether your employers count and then proceed to the next step from there. Step 2, what type of federal loan do you have? This can actually be incredibly confusing. It seems like a simple concept, but if you started to look at this, you realize that it's actually a little bit more complicated. So I'll explain it now and then we'll show you how to do it later. So the 3 major loan types that we've mentioned are direct loans, federal family education or FFEL or FFELP loans, and Perkins loans. So for public service workers to get loan forgiveness for their FFEL and Perkins loans under the waiver, you're going to have to consolidate it and convert. Again, you just have to apply for it by the deadline. It's not going to get processed by the deadline, and that's fine. Your job is to apply by the deadline. We'll show you how to apply because you need to have a direct loan when it's all said and done. And again, what's special about this waiver is that you're not resetting the clock. You'll get credit for the time you spent with your non-direct loans, even after you consolidate them. So that's step 2. And then the final step is you got to certify your employment with the Department of Education. Remember, they don't know where you work until you tell them. The IRS might know where you work. That's a different branch of different agency, and that's not the way the federal government works. So they need to know that you've been working for a qualifying employer, government, 501c3 nonprofit, certain other nonprofits. The way you do this is with a form called the Pslf Form. It used to be called the Employment Certification Form. You basically have to certify that you worked there for a certain period of time and that your employment was full-time and what kind of organization the employer is. So we'll show you how to do this, but you can generate this using that same Pslf help tool. It's an online tool on the government's website. And if you generate the form with them, you just got to get your employer to sign off on it, and then you submit it. We're going to show you how to do that and talk about that. So those are the 3 steps. Again, confirm your employer, confirm your loan type, and change the type if necessary, certify your employment. Now we're going to walk through how to actually do that with some screenshots. Okay, again, some helpful, hopefully, repetition, and we're going to start with confirming your employer. So this is studentaid.gov. This is the government's main website for all student loan things. If you're not familiar with it, you should get familiar with it. You should make what's called an FSA ID, it's Federal Student Aid ID. That's your login credentials for studentaid.gov. All of your federal student loans will appear on this. No private student loans will appear, but all federal student loans will appear. And this is where you can access all your repayment options, your cancellation options, etc., about your federal loans. Now, I will say they just sort of unhelpfully for us a week ago change the menus for this. So just those top ones that you see in the red box, manage loans, and next to it is complete and process. Those menus change. So I'm just going to tell you, not the underlying ones that we're going to really talk about, but I'm just going to tell you what the change is. So here it says manage loans, and then you can go to the Pslf option, which is also in red. Now it's going to say loan forgiveness at the top. And when you hover over it or click it, you'll still have a Pslf, public service loan forgiveness option. So I'm sorry about that recent change, but that's just, it went from manage loans to loan forgiveness. So when you click public service loan forgiveness, it'll bring you to a page where you can launch the Pslf help tool. Now, even though there is a way to check your employer without logging in, I recommend you use the help tool for some reasons that we'll talk about. You launch it, you click it, you can see this, the forms in front of you. You're going to add each of your employers. You're going to need their employer tax EIN number. You can find this on your W-2, you can ask your HR, or if you're a large employer, you can Google it. If you're a large government employer, it's possible that your employer shares an EIN number with another agency or another office. So really just ask your HR, look on your W-2. So I used to work for the state of New York. I put in the New York State, the state's EIN number. I put in my period of employment. If you're still employed, there's a button you click so that you enter a start date and click a button to say, I still work there. And then it'll pull up the search results. You can see that it says state of New York and it says eligible. Again, this is not exhaustive. If no one from your organization has applied, it might say possibly ineligible, or it might say unknown. Also, if you apply and it says ineligible, but you're like, no, I definitely work for a government or a 501c3 or an otherwise qualifying organization, just power through. You should still apply. And the worst thing that happens is you get rejected and there's no penalty for that. It's better to apply and be wrong than to not be sure and not apply and miss the opportunity. That's that first step of confirming your employer. And again, I recommend logging into the Pslf help tool and just proceeding with the process there. So once you've determined that your employer past and present qualifies, you're going to want to check your loan type. So we're going back to studentaid.gov. When you log in using that FSA ID, you'll have an option to look at your dashboard. Your dashboard will be where all of your student loans are listed out. You can see an example of it on the screen now, and it sort of toggles open where there's more than one loan. You see 2 consolidation loans, it's toggled open. Under it, you see 3 grad plus loans, it's toggled closed. You also see it shows you loans that have been paid off. This example is someone who only has consolidation loans. The prior ones underneath it have a $0 balance. They were either paid off directly or they were paid off through that consolidation, right? When you convert one to the other, you're really paying off your old loans and taking out a new loan. It's not like conversion per se. So again, if you don't have an FSA ID in student.gov, that's your first step for all of this, because this is how you access this information. So it can be very complicated to know what kind of loan you have, but for the purpose of Pslf specifically, it's as simple actually as just seeing whether the word direct appears in it. So when you toggle that consolidation loan open and you see it spread out here on the top, if you can't read it, I'll sort of mouth it out to you. The first one says direct consolidation unsubsidized. The second says direct consolidation subsidized. Unsubsidized and subsidized doesn't matter for Pslf. It matters if they're direct. These are both direct. So this is a loan type that doesn't have to be converted. If it had said FEL or FELP or family education loan or Perkins, you see an example of a Perkins here, third from the bottom. That's a type, if it had a balance, you'd say, oh, I have to consolidate that. I have to convert it to a direct loan type through consolidation to benefit from Pslf. Another way you can get a more granular look is if when you're looking at your dashboard, you see here on the top with the red box, there's a view details option, and then there'll be a further option to click download my aid data. That'll download a text file, a TXT file, that is just a running list of all of your loans, past and present, paid off, and with the balance. And it'll say their loan type on it. There'll be a field that says loan type, colon, and then what the loan type is: direct loan, FEL loan, Perkins, etc. It's a slightly more granular, but a little bit more confusing way to do it. I recommend doing, I'll go back one slide, just this way, look and see if you have direct loans. If you have some non-direct loans with a balance, take the next steps. Okay. So if you have a non-direct loan, you have to consolidate it, right? So how do we do this? So now we're going back to studentaid.gov. Here's another example. For PSLF, I said that new menu on the top was going to be loan forgiveness. There's going to be a new menu at the top that says loan repayment, but then it'll be that same consolidate my loans option in the second box here. So again, I'm sorry that they just changed that. We haven't had a chance to update our slides. That's the one update. It'll say loan repayment to get to your consolidate my loans option. If you click that, it'll take you to the online consolidation application. You can do it all online. It takes about 20 minutes. It's pretty straightforward. You can also do it by paper, but I recommend doing it online because it'll get filed immediately. So it'll walk you through the steps, what you need to take, which is selecting which loans you want to consolidate for consolidation. Again, you're going to want to include any non-direct loans. It'll confirm the new loan amount and the rate of your interest rate. Your new loan amount should be the total of your outstanding balance that you're paying off, and the interest rate will be a weighted balance of your existing interest rates. You do not get a market rate here. This is not a refinancing. You'll get a weighted balance that reflects your existing loans and what the interest rates were there. You can also select a payment plan and a servicer. There's a way to check a box too that says that you're interested in public service loan forgiveness. You see here Fed Loan is highlighted in blue. They used to be the public service loan forgiveness servicer. It just switched to MOHELA, which is right after that. So by selecting the PSLF button saying, yes, I'm interested, and by selecting MOHELA, you'll get your loans set up with them as the servicer, which is a good seamless way to do that. Right, so you may have heard that change was recent, Fed Loan to MOHELA, but if you're just doing this process now, you should just focus on MOHELA at this point. Now, a quick tip about consolidation in this context is that I said you only have to consolidate if your loans aren't direct loans for PSLF purposes. That is true, but the way the government is handling this, it's sort of like a hack for this process, but it's above board. They have said this is the case, is there might be some instances where you want to consolidate a direct loan with another direct loan or a direct loan with a non-direct loan. And this is if you have loans of varying ages. If you have undergrad debt, for instance, and then you worked for a few years and then you have graduate school debt. PSLF requires 10 years of payment and work for each loan that you want canceled. So in that instance of undergrad, work, grad debt, your undergrad debt will have more work attributed to it. It'll get to 10 years faster. So you'll have two different 10-year timelines. That's just an example of how you might have different age debts, right? In this process, through the waiver, the government has said that if you consolidate all those loans together, that new loan will have as much credit as the oldest of the underlying loan. So in this example, undergrad debt consolidated with grad debt, even if they're both direct loan types, when you put them together, the whole new loan will be treated for PSLF purposes like it is as old as your undergrad debt, which means the whole thing will be canceled on 10 years based on the undergrad timeline. You'll have one timeline, you'll be debt-free sooner than if you had two timelines and were working towards them separately. So that is a note about that. Similarly, I said Parent Plus loans don't qualify for the waiver. That is true, but if you have a non-Parent Plus loan and a Parent Plus loan, if you consolidate them together, the new loan will be given as much credit towards PSLF as the non-Parent Plus loan, but will include the dollars from the Parent Plus loan with it. So you can piggyback in the debt from the Parent Plus loan and get towards cancellation with this. Now, consolidation loans that have a Parent Plus loan on them have limited options for repayment, and they're often the more expensive options. So it's something you have to weigh for yourself personally. If you're close to cancellation, or if you're going to get cancellation by consolidating all these, it's probably worth including your Parent Plus loan and getting it consolidated. If you're far away, you need a couple more years, you need to figure out whether you can afford the income contingent repayment plan, which is the more expensive plan because you have that Parent Plus loan included. Okay, that's a very individualized, we can't really give blanket advice on that in a large setting. Okay, so remember, under regular PSLF rules, when you need to be in an IDR plan to accrue more credit. So when you're selecting a repayment plan through the consolidation application, I recommend you pick an IDR plan. It'll tell you the estimates for them and you can just select one. And when payments resume, you'll be good to go. Again, it's IBR, ICR, Pay, and Repay are the main plans. All right, now, a quick note on this. This is why I started with cancellation. And I'm going to try to be very clear about this. The government, the president recently made a change to his cancellation program. And if you have a loan type currently that is not receiving the federal payment pause, you are no longer eligible to get debt cancellation under that $10,000 or $20,000 cancellation. You can still get PSLF by consolidating that loan into these direct loans that are getting the payment pause and that are the qualifying type. But a certain older people who have what's called commercial FFEL loans or Perkins loans, if you have not been getting the payment pause, two things. Definitely would have to consolidate your loan to get PSLF, but would no longer be eligible either way for the debt cancellation. The reason we're talking about this now is because they've created some uncertainty. If you have both loans that are getting the payment pause and another loan that is not getting the payment pause, if you consolidate those together, you might invalidate your whole new loan to get the 10 or 20,000 in cancellation. This is only relevant for people who have both those two types. You're getting the payment pause on some loans, you're not getting on other loans. If all of your loans are getting the payment pause, you can ignore this. If all of your loans are not getting the payment pause, you can ignore this. This is a very small population of people. But for that population, if you consolidate your loans, for instance, to get public service loan forgiveness, you might invalidate your whole balance of the consolidated loans for the $10,000 or $20,000. Now, for some people, again, PSLF, no cap on how much you can get canceled. PSLF is definitely going to be the priority. The 10 or 20,000 will be a drop in the bucket. They should just consolidate. For people who have lower balances, they should really think about this and think about whether it makes sense to consolidate. Again, we can't give individual advice here, but I want to flag that potential risk, which is only for a small population, right? So I'm just going to make that point again. If you go to forgivemystudentdebt.org, the website I mentioned, there's more information on this. All right, the final step, and then we're going to do Q&A. Certifying employment. How do you do that? They don't know where you work until you tell them. So again, the layout is slightly different. The top box is going to say loan forgiveness, but then it'll say PSLF. We're going to click back through that help tool. These slides you've already seen. You're going to enter all your employment information for all the employers you want credit for since 2007, and then it'll generate the PSLF form. It's really just a two-page form. The first page is your personal information. The second page is the employer information, and it's really just have to check one or two boxes, and then sign off on the range of dates you worked there and that you were full-time and how many hours you worked. The form is called the PSLF form. It used to be called the employment certification form if you've been doing this. Once you have the form, they sign it and then you submit it to Mohila. Now is the servicer who processes these. The instructions for submission are on the forms on section 7 of the form. You can fax it or mail it if you aren't already with Mohila. If your loans are already with Mohila, you can upload it to their website. Now you have to file this by the 31st. I just said that, but they did just announce a new change. 31st is coming up soon. If you use the PSLF help tool to generate your form, you produce it using that help tool online, or you use the help tool and they say at some point, you need to stop and wait 30 to 60 days while we verify something. Now, you obviously don't have 30 or 60 days for the waiver, but if you do either of those, use the help tool to create your form and then go get it signed, or use the help tool and they tell you to wait, and then eventually they say, all right, now you can proceed, and then you go get it signed. You don't have to submit the form by the 31st. The government has said they will make a note on the back end and you can get it signed and submitted after that. But this is a way to give you a little bit more breathing room if you use the help tool. It's not just if you log into the help tool, you got to get to one of those two endpoints, either generate the form or have them say, please stop while we figure something out, and then they'll let you proceed. If you use, for some reason, if the help tool is not working for you and you need to download a PDF of the form and fill it out by hand, then you must still get it signed and submitted by the 31st. And that's really important. Don't miss this opportunity. I would say for everyone, if you can get it all done by the 31st, that's the best practice. But just know if you use the help tool, you have some breathing room and you should get it in as quickly as possible. If for some reason you do need to use a PDF download, the help tool is not working for you for whatever reason, you can go to the studentaid.gov website, or you can go to Mohila's website, which you see here, and go to their PSLF page. And if you click through the employer button, then on the right-hand side, you see a form that you can download. You can download that PDF to fill it out by hand. It's very simple. The form has been updated, and you should see two indicators you're getting the right form. Is it says it's good through 2023 on the left-hand side, and on the right, it tells you to submit the form to Mohila. Those are good indicators that you're using the right form. All right, so you submit the form, what happens? The Mohila will confirm that you either have the right loan type or that you are consolidating your loan, and you will, and your account will be moved to Mohila if it hasn't already. They will then check your payment history, run it against your employment time frame, and they will ultimately make a determination and send you a letter that says you have X number of payments. If it's 120 or greater, you'll get your loan canceled. If it's less than 120 or fewer than 120, you'll have to continue, you'll keep those on your account, and you'll have to continue to accrue credits towards cancellation. Okay. So some common issues. This is about 3 slides, and then we're going to do Q&A with Ricardo. don't submit messy forms. Just don't. It'll get rejected, and it's you're under the wire now. You don't want to have to resubmit things, right? So if your employer gives you something where they've crossed something out and rewritten it, give them a fresh form that reflects their corrections and get them to sign it fresh. Don't mess around with this at this point. You don't have time for that. Also, you might get a message at some point that says, and at the end of the day, with only 2.5 weeks left, I don't think you'll be in this camp, but you might get a message that says something like, oh, your loans are in forbearance, you have to take them out of forbearance for PSLF. That forbearance is just the payment pause. You can ignore this. This is a known inaccurate letter that the servicers are sending. It's frustrating that we know this is happening and the government hasn't stopped it, but that's the world we're living in, quite frankly. So that's all that we can tell you about this. So just ignore that. Your goal is just get everything filed. If there's an issue on the back end, you can resolve it, but you want to make sure you are on time, and you can ignore sort of things that don't seem to line up with what we've talked about today, such as you don't have to get yourself out of a forbearance, right? Similarly, if the help tool, for some reason you're using it and the help tool is not letting you proceed one way versus another, just proceed however you can, even if in this example here is you have to select, I do have 120 or I don't have 120 yet. It doesn't matter which one you pick as long as you can get through, because you just want to certify your employment by the deadline, right? So just pick whichever option lets you proceed through. And if you can't proceed through, download the form, but make sure you get it in by the 31st. And then finally, again, when you consolidate your loans, at this point with the waiver deadline coming up, you would see this after the waiver if you're consolidating your loans, but you might initially, when you consolidate, get like a welcome letter from your new loan that says, here's your new loan. You have like 1 month of PSLF credit or 2 months. That is a misfire. It's an auto-generated letter because, again, normally when you consolidate, you lose past credit. If you just wait a few more weeks, you'll get an updated letter that says, never mind, here's your count that reflects the waiver, and you'll have, your 80, your 120, your 130, however many it is. So it can be very alarming to get this initial letter. But if you do all these steps before the 31st, you can just ignore this first letter, which again is sort of odd advice to give. But they do have been sending out these inaccurate letters. Okay, so last slide, the takeaways are you can get credit for a month that didn't use to count before. The deadline is the 31st. It's not automatic. You're gonna have to check your employer, check your loan type and consolidate if necessary, submit your forms. If you experience an issue at any point, file a complaint. You're not the only one who'll be experiencing it, and beware of scams. Okay, now with our remaining 15 or 20 minutes or so, we're gonna do some Q&A and figure out how much we can get done. I know that was a lot, but I do wanna, we'll put it in the chat and follow up. Studentaid.gov is the main government website. You can go to DISB's website, and you can go to forgivemystudentdebt.org to see all of this content again, so you don't have to have memorized it. But I do have a lot of faith in you that if you just sit down and do these steps, you'll do everything you have to do by the deadline.
Thanks so much, Winston. The information is really overwhelming. Those of us, people like you and me, who do this every day, we understand the language, we understand the process, and so it makes it easier. I think the part that makes this even more challenging for people is many have attempted to do this in the past, and they haven't had a good end result. And then when you start to look at the amount of debt that people carry, it makes them that much more anxious. Before we get into
that point, the people who've been burned in the past, this waiver is meant for you. So if you've been burned in the past, all the more reason you should just, take a deep breath and jump back in, because this is meant to address the problems that you experienced in the past.
Right. Thanks, Winston, for bringing that point up. What I do want to make sure that everyone understands is a few things before we get into the questions. I've put the slide deck in the chat. So a number of you are concerned about the density of the material, the speed. You do not have to digest all of it at this time. Download the slides, it's in the chat. Also, go to forgivemystudentdebt.org. That website literally takes each section of this presentation and breaks it down. How to consolidate step by step. There's a video and there's screenshots. How to complete the PSLF application using the PSLF help tool, step by step. So don't feel overwhelmed. The information is available. You can also go to DISB's website, disb.dc.gov, click on Student Loan Ombudsman, go to the webinars tab, and you can watch a similar video, really the same video that we recorded originally back in January is available there, as is the slide deck. We also have a list of FAQs available, including, what's district government's tax ID number. We tried to anticipate all of the basic questions that you may have. So with a little bit of investment of time, you can find the responses to your questions. And you can also go back and listen again and again and again. The important thing is you cannot hurt yourself by doing any of the work that we've asked you to do for yourself here today. And you have 2 weeks to get it done. All right. Winston, the first question that I want to pose to you is, and I don't know if the person was with us when we first started, but going back to the cancellation, the question is, should those of us planning to use PSLF for the 10,000 also apply for the 10,000 cancellation, or how do we know we're qualified to do both?
Yes, you should. For both of these, there's no harm in applying, first of all. And second of all, you should apply for both. But more importantly, don't think that the cancellation replaces PSLF. For most people, you have more than 10,000 or even 20,000. PSLF will cover all of that. If you apply for the cancellation and get your 10 or 20,000, that is fantastic. You might have leftover, right? So you want to have done the PSLF process before the deadline. And because these are different deadlines, you can't really wait for one for the other. You have to just plan to do both.
Excellent response. Also, have all defaults on student loans be removed. We don't like absolutes. So maybe you could explain briefly, fresh start.
Yeah.
And also the fact that not all defaults are going to be exactly gone.
Yeah, so Fresh Start is a program that the government has announced where most people who've been sort of languishing in default for a long time are going to have their loans removed from default, their credit history fixed, and their eligibility restored for all the things that you lose when you go into default. That is going to happen automatically, and they'll get outreach about this over the next couple of months. We don't have a ton more information about that, but for PSLF purposes, I would say if you are in default currently, you should still certify your loans. You should certify your employment for PSLF. The government has been a little cagey, I'm just being quite frank about what we know and what we don't know about this, a little cagey about how these two programs will work together, Fresh Start and PSLF, but there's no harm in certifying your employment. And we've heard that if you do that part on time, they'll try to honor that once your loans get out of default and give you whatever credit you're due. Now, again, time in default doesn't count towards PSLF, but if you have prior time when you weren't in default, you can still get that credit for PSLF once your loans return to good standing.
Thank you, Winston. Another topic that comes up, time and time again, is the Parent Plus loans. We want to make sure that parents understand that the Parent Plus loans are eligible for PSLF. They're just not eligible for the waiver program. Would you hit that for us one more time, Winston?
Right. So Parent Plus loans, most of them, there are some much older ones, but most of Parent Plus loans are actually a type of direct loan. So they're eligible for PSLF. It's sort of confusing, but normally you have to consolidate your Parent Plus loans in order to access the income-driven repayment plans that you need. But the point here is that Parent Plus loans are not eligible for the special waiver benefits of PSLF. So they're not eligible for you can get credit for any past repayment plan part of PSLF, of the waiver. If you consolidate them and mix them in with another loan, that new loan will essentially bring the Parent Plus loan into the waiver process by piggybacking it onto that eligible loan, but you won't see your time on that Parent Plus loan reflected. It sort of hiding in the shadows there, and your eligibility for PSLF will be dictated by the non-Parent Plus loan. There is a separate program happening next year that will automatically sort of give these Parent Plus loan borrowers some additional credit. So you're not going to fully lose out on it, and it's going to be automatic. So I'm just going to make that point. You might see your Parent Plus loan account credits increase at some point, and that's a good thing. The automatic thing that might happen is a good thing, but there's nothing you can do about it right now. And for the purpose of the waiver, it's only if you have Parent Plus loans and non-Parent Plus loans, you should think about consolidating them together to benefit from the waiver. But you might have higher payments afterwards. So you really got to do a little bit of math to figure out how close to cancellation am I. If you only have Parent Plus loans, there's not much, quite honestly, that this presentation has to offer you, since this presentation is about the waiver, except that you should still tell your friends and family because they might have other loans that do qualify.
Right, thanks. And that once again, the Parent Plus loan is still eligible for traditional public service loan forgiveness. So
Right.
we don't want parents to think that they can't get anything. Winston, would you, I've seen this repeatedly. People are receiving letters from Fed Loan Servicing stating that they have 5 payments or 3 payments that are qualifying for public service loan forgiveness. And they know that they have had additional counts during the administrative forbearance period. We know that these letters are not accurate. Can you talk a little bit about the auto-generated letter and the updates that will be forthcoming so that people can feel a little bit more comfortable about the correspondence that's been so misleading?
Yeah, there's been a lot of, it's very unfortunate, again, because the government knows this is happening and hasn't put a stop to it. And it's very odd advice to give, to tell you just verbally on this webinar to ignore a piece of mail that you're getting. So I want to acknowledge that that is like a totally unusual dynamic that we're in. There are these auto-generated letters that the companies, the huge companies, Mohila, FedLoan, Nelnet, send, because their systems are hardwired that way, and they never updated them to reflect these Pslf waiver special rules. So they're sending out letters that just don't reflect the rules, and then they're following up with customized letters that are like, oh, this is actually what Ricardo's account looks like, or actually what Winston. So if you get an initial correspondence that is like, whoa, this isn't what I thought was going to happen, right? Like, what about this waiver thing? Just wait. You can still file a complaint. There's no harm, no foul to doing that, but just wait and don't panic. And within a couple of weeks, you should get a follow-up letter that is specific to the waiver and to your account, and that reflects that. And this happens in a couple of instances. It's consolidation, it's a payment count. It's not one type of misfire letter, unfortunately. But again, if you get something that doesn't seem right, go to studentaid.gov, file a complaint. It's good to do that. Talk to Ricardo's office, but know that it will almost definitely follow up with a corrected version.
I would also like to add here that our Attorney General Carl Racine actually sent a letter to Fed Loan Servicing asking, how many district residents have received this misleading letter, and asking that they take steps to ameliorate, this disinformation that has been going out. I've done what I can to explain to people that the letters are auto-generated again and that they're misleading. I think one other data point I can share with people on the webinar is that the waiver review is conducted separately from the traditional Pslf review, which also explains it. So when you use the Pslf help tool to submit your information, you're actually generating a data stream that goes directly to the Department of Education. And they then begin to do a review and match records, and they will then send a supplemental file to the servicer, and they will essentially collaborate on updating those records. At various steps in the process, you will get auto-generated correspondence that will have numbers that will change possibly over several months. Now that we're getting to the close of the program, I think those communications are going to be a lot less frequent, and there's going to be a lot more time in between. And so I'm asking everyone to pack their patience and to anticipate that you may not know until early next year what the outcome is going to be for you. Winston, there's a question that regularly comes up, and if we could speak to this briefly, what about defunct organizations? There is a process for people to certify 501c3s that are no longer in existence. And I always email people information on that. Would you like to speak a little bit about that to the group?
Yeah. So there is a box, whether it's a defunct organization or whether you have a belligerent employer who is refusing to sign your form, there is a box above your signature on the first page that you can check that basically just says, I tried and I could not get an employer to sign this form. You should not think of that as a shortcut. You should definitely try to get a signature, because the signature will make the process go smoother. If you check that box, the Department of Education might come back to you and ask for supporting documentation. If you do check that box, you should try to include upfront as much supporting documentation as you can. If you have a W-2, an offer letter, something that reflects your time working at that organization. that helps, but that's how you can address that. You can check that box. Also, I saw someone had a similar question about, well, what if it's 2 weeks? What if my employer like can't turn it around in 2 weeks? Again, if you generated it with the help tool, you have some wiggle room there.
Yes.
If you didn't, then if it's like they're really not getting back to you, I would recommend checking the box and submitting it. But again, don't just to get something in on time. But again, don't use that checkbox as a shortcut because it will create more work for you down the line.
Yes. Excellent. Let's see. Okay. I'm trying to find a question that'll be really helpful to the group.
Someone I see asking, they worked, if they worked for the school while they were a student, and I think a version of this is I was a student and I also worked. Depending on whether you were considered full-time, that's one thing, but also your loans often when you go back to school are put in what's called an in-school deferment.
Right.
In-school deferment does not count for PSLF. So you might have had a job that hit 30 hours while you were in school, but if your loans were in an in-school deferment, that's not going to qualify. So there's two questions there. If you're a student who's working, are you working full-time for a qualifying employer? But also, what was your loan status? An in-school deferment won't count.
Mm-hmm. Winston, there is a question about and I'm not prepared to talk about the Joint Consolidation Loan Separation Act. Are you able to address that?
Only to say that there is a type of old loan where married or formerly married borrowers were both on the loan and they had no way to split it and couldn't access other programs that way. Congress passed a law 2 or 3 weeks ago that allowed them to split it. Biden just signed it this week, I think, or maybe last Friday.
Mm-hmm.
There's no news on that other than that the Department of Education has said they will try to implement it as soon as humanly possible in order to get folks eligibility. I would say if you aren't hearing anything, submit a Pslf form to certify that employment. Try to get as much of your eligibility certified as possible and keep an eye out. Make sure your contact information is up to date with the Department of Education because it's going to be moving very quickly to try to get you the credit that you're due.
Okay. Actually, there's another important point. Winston, in prior presentations, we had told people repeatedly that if they found that they needed to consolidate their loans, that they should wait for the consolidation before moving forward with completing the application and certification using the PSLF help tool. Would you just reemphasize that that's no longer the case, that Ed wants people just to get everything in now?
Yeah, you don't have to wait for one thing to finish for the other. All you have to do is submit your preferably online application for consolidation. And as soon as you hit submit, you can just open a new browser window and start using the PSLF help tool to make a PSLF form, get that signed and submit it. So you do not have, it'll take 30 to 60 days to get your loan consolidated. You should not wait for that time. Submit your application and then immediately start working on your forms.
Right. And by that same token, if you have the information and you want to use the PSLF help tool to do the application before you do the loan consolidation, get it done. Don't wait. Ideally, we still want you to get your consolidation done first, but there's no reason to wait for proof of anything. Get them both done because they're probably not going to be looked at until next month anyway, either one of them.
Yeah. So I see that there, we have probably more questions than we have time for on our forgivemystudentdebt.org.
I missed the time.
Yeah, I know we have a lot to cover. We have very extensive FAQs about PSLF and about cancellation actually on forgivemystudentdebt.org. There's an FAQ button at the top. Again, that's forgivemystudentdebt.org. This information, Ricardo can help get it out. We have recorded. But again, the bottom line is don't sleep on this. It's not mutually exclusive to cancellation. Focus on public service loan forgiveness. Even if you don't have 10 years, do it because you'll get all the credit you could possibly get and then keep accruing all this debt. It'll cancel your whole debt. It's tax-free. It's really a boon. It doesn't matter what you do. It matters who you work for. So tell all your colleagues. Don't assume people have a certain type of job that counts or not counts. If they work for the same person as you, they qualify. You never know who has debt because in this country, we don't really talk about debt. So definitely spread the word. You could really be delivering like a $200,000 bit of information to someone who takes advantage of this and gets their loans canceled.
Correct. And to end on a really, really, really high note, I just want to share with everyone out here that, this past fiscal year, we've supported residents in getting residents employees achieving over $1 million in student loan debt forgiveness. So the program works. There's work to be done. You can do it. And we have provided you with the tools necessary to get across the finish line. So please lean forward, take advantage of the resources, check out our FAQs, check out the past webinar at disb.dc.gov, go to Student Loan Ombudsman Webinars. You can download the PDF, go step by step, back up the video, slow down, take your time. Also go to that wonderful forgivemystudentdebt.org where they have literally broken it up into sections with screenshots. You cannot go wrong. Thank you for your time. I will give the day back to you. Thank you, Winston. Thank you to our Attorney General, Carl Racine, for his work on our behalf. Thank you, Mayor Bowser. Thank you to our Commissioner, Kareem Ann Woods. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye now.